Hi class, and welcome to chapter 19's recording. This is on the reproductive system, and I'm recording this not because I wasn't able to go to class, but just because we're behind one day and we just have one day of class left. So here's the recording of chapter 19, reproductive system, and then on Wednesday we'll have our final chapter, chapter 20, which will be on hereditary and development. So reproductive system, basically the essential roles of the reproductive system are to continue the human species, male and female. It plays essential roles in the development of the structural and functional differences between males and females. Your reproductive system will influence your human behavior, produce offspring. However, unlike other organ systems, you would be able to survive without your reproductive system. So the functions are to produce gametes, which are the sex cells, either the eggs or the sperm, fertilization, which would be the union of egg and sperm to produce a new offspring, development and nourishment of a new individual, and the production of reproductive hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. And that usually begins, testosterone begins, they really kind of pick up during puberty. So here are the main reproductive organs found between the male, the female. I don't know if you guys have a lab on reproductive, but we'll be going through this a little more as the PowerPoint goes on, and there will be lecture questions, basic labeling pictures of the different organs as we kind of go through them a little more. So the gametes themselves are the sex cells. These are the sperm or the oocytes in males and females respectively. Meiosis is the special type of cell division that leads to the formation of these sex cells, so that each sperm cell and each oocyte contains 23 chromosomes. This is important to note because for a cell to be complete, it needs 46 chromosomes. So sex cells will contain half the normal amount of chromosomes, 23, with a goal or the purpose of one day, perhaps not always, joining to form the complete 46 chromosomes. So before meiosis begins, and again, meiosis is the formation of sex cells, eggs and sperm, all the chromosomes will be duplicated at the beginning of the meiosis. Each of the 46 chromosome consists of 2 chromatids connected by a centromere. The chromosomes will align or become in a straight line as pairs in a process called synapsis. And because each chromosome consists of 2 chromatids, the pairing of the chromosomes brings the 2 chromatids of each chromosome very close together. Genetic material is exchanged on occasion when a part of a chromatid on one chromosome will break off and be exchanged with a part of another chromatid from the other chromosome. And we call this crossing over. And this is a way to further kind of change up the gene pool and kind of allow for genetic material to be exchanged and variation. There's kind of 2 steps to meiosis. Meiosis 1 produces 2 cells, each having 23 chromosomes, composed of 2 chromatids joined at a centromere. And meiosis 2, each of the 2 cells will divide into 2 more cells. The centromere breaks, giving separate chromosomes. So the final results from meiosis, and this is the important part, is you get 4 cells from 1, each having 23 chromosomes each. And since the number of chromosomes are reduced during the process of dividing into 4 cells, the process is what we call a reduction division process. So these are the steps going through meiosis, and feel free to pause the video just to kind of read through these steps. You might know that they're similar to the steps of mitosis, except in meiosis, we're producing 4 daughter cells, each with half the number of chromosomes, which is just 23. So then from fertilization to a fetus, fertilization is the medically appropriate term for uniting a sperm and an egg or an oocyte. A zygote is what develops after fertilization, and it usually develops into what we call an embryo 3 to 14 days after the act of fertilization. An embryo is what we call 14 to 56 days after fertilization, and then we change names to a fetus about 56 days after fertilization. So the male reproductive system, simply put, is a series of ducts or tubes with the goals of bringing sperm into the female reproductive tract to cause fertilization to occur. So we'll go through kind of what makes up the male reproductive tract, the testes, series of ducts, accessory glands, supporting structures, The epididymis, ductus deferens, urethra are the ducts. The accessory glands will be your seminal vesicles, prostate, and bulbourethral. And supporting structures include the scrotum and the penis. And we'll go through all these as shown here. So basically, we'll start here in the testes. This is where sperm are formed. They then hang out in the epididymis, where sperm will be matured. And when they are fully matured, sperm will travel up through the ductus deferens, which travels up here. I'll change to my laser so you can see it a little better. The ductus deferens brings sperm through, kind of goes up and around behind the bladder, through the seminal vesicle, where it picks up some important kind of fluid that helps it to kind of survive on its journey. If it does need to make it into the female reproductive tract, it travels through the ejaculatory duct, which is in the prostate gland, and the prostate gland is right below the bladder. And then the prostate gland joins up with the urethra. So you can see here that males, unlike females, have kind of one exiting tract for both urine and sperm. The urine comes from the bladder and the sperm comes from the ejaculatory duct. And they both travel out of the urethra then, obviously not at the same time. So that is that. You can also see here where the prostate gland is located, kind of below the bladder. Prostate cancer is really hard. Well, it's not hard to detect, but it's a little uncomfortable. So males, when you get to be 40, 50, be sure to go in for a prostate gland. Unfortunately, the only way to check for, irregularities within the prostate gland is to feel the prostate gland through the anal canal. So it's a little bit of an uncomfortable procedure. But it's really necessary because it's the only way to check for irregularities in the prostate gland. It can also check for PSA enzymes being elevated, but just be sure to get those checkups, males, even if they're uncomfortable, because it could save you in the long run. Early detection for prostate cancer is key. We had a couple other glands here, so seminal vesicles, bulbourethral gland, and then the prostate glands. These are all our accessory glands, and they all secrete excess fluid to just help nourish the sperm, to kind of provide this kind of seminal juices or seminal fluid to help the sperm if it were to go in and fertilize an egg. So the scrotum itself is the sac outside the body that contains the testes. It contains the dartus muscle that will move the scrotum and testes close to and away from the body, depending on the temperature. It's really important that the testes in the scrotum are outside the body, because sperm must develop at a temperature less than normal body temperature. So sperm can only develop if they're less than the 37 degrees Celsius. So that's why males, your reproductive organ, the testes, is held outside the body. Females, ovaries are held inside the body because we don't have that temperature verification that we need. Testes then are the prime male reproductive organ that produce the sperm. They're held in that scrotum kind of sac or bag outside the body. They contain seminiferous tubules where sperm are produced. The seminiferous tubules contain interstitial cells, germ cells, and sustentacular cells as well. Okay, so the epididymis is a thread-like tubule on each side of the testes. This is where the seminiferous tubules will empty new sperm, and they have to spend some time maturing and developing here and gaining the ability to swim to be able to bind to oocytes. Ductus deferens is also known as the vas deferens. This is the tube that extends from the epididymis, joins the seminal vesicle. This is what is cut during a vasectomy. The urethra extends from the urinary bladder to the end of the penis, and this will be the passageway for both urine and the seminal fluid. The penis then is made up of kind of three pieces: corpus cavernosum, corpus spongiosum, and the spongy urethra. These kind of three columns the corpus, these three columns of erectile tissue will fill with blood for an erection. They will transfer sperm from the male to the female, and they will also excrete urine. So here are the glands. Seminal vesicles help form the ejaculatory duct. They're next to the ductus deferens, right, kind of behind the bladder. The prostate gland is underneath the bladder. It's about the size of a walnut. It surrounds the urethra. Bulbourethral glands are two small mucus secreting glands near the base of the prostate gland. And you can see those located here: seminal vesicle, prostate gland, and bulbourethral gland. Here's another look at the male reproductive system, showing the two testes, the epididymis, the ductus deferens, and the muscles and these testicular artery veins and nerves travel through a canal called the inguinal canal in a piece called the spermatic cord. And this is what occurs in fetuses. In male fetuses, the testes will descend through this inguinal canal. Sometimes, not very common, babies, boys will be born where their testes are not descended yet. And because these kind of structures descend from the abdominal cavity through an inguinal canal, this is what kind of makes males much more susceptible to hernias, because there's basically a hole in their abdominal wall, really low, to their pelvic region, where they have this spermatic cord descending. And this kind of hole, or this opening, can easily be not ruptured, but there could be a hole in it where intestines could get through, or something else could pop out of this inguinal canal, and that causes hernias sometimes in males. Here is a look at the dorsal surface showing the urethra, corpus cavernosum, corpus spongiosum, and these will be the three columns that will fill with blood during an erection. And then the semen is the mixture of sperm and secretions from the glands. It provides a transport medium and nutrients that protect and activate sperm to kind of help them on their way if they do go on and fertilize an egg. About 60% of the fluid is from seminal vesicles, 30% from prostate gland, some from the bulbourethral gland, and some from the testes. Seminal vesicles produce fructose, which contain a prostaglandin, which decreases the mucus thickness around the cervix and the uterine tube to help sperm move through the female reproductive tract. We'll learn soon that the female kind of uterus, vagina, kind of all area is a very hostile environment. It wants to keep things out for good reason, to protect, a fetus that could be developing in there. So sperm kind of need extra help to actually get in there. Seminal vesicles, the fluid from them will also contain a coagulant that helps deliver the semen into the female. The prostate gland specifically contains enzymes to liquefy the semen that helps to neutralize the acidity of the vagina, and the bulbourethral gland kind of does the same thing. Testicular secretions then include the sperm and the small amount of fluid associated with the sperm. About 2 to 5 milliliters of semen is ejaculated each time, and 1 milliliter of semen contains about 100 million sperm, which is a huge amount, totally different from females that just release 1 egg at a time. And sperm can live up to 72 hours once inside the female, so something just to keep in mind there if maybe you're not trying to get pregnant. The path of the sperm develop in your seminiferous tubules, like we talked about, which are in the testes. They mature and gain the ability to swim in the epididymis. They travel through the ductus deferens. They receive all the secretions that help kind of survive, or help it survive if it enters into a female. And then the urethra is where the semen and the sperm exit the body. Spermatogenesis, so whenever we see the word genesis, this means formation of a cell. So this is the formation of sperm cells. This will begin at puberty, where interstitial cells in your testes increase in number and size. Seminiferous tubules enlarge. Seminiferous tubules will produce germ cells and those sustentacular cells. And this is the production of germ cells, starting with a germ cell changing into spermatogonia, primary, secondary, spermatids, and then finally sperm cells. So this is just kind of the spermatogenesis, how we get a sperm cell with 46 chromosomes. It goes through mitosis and then through meiosis to get these 4 sperm cells, each with 23 chromosomes. Again, because it's I don't want to say hope, or the potential goal that each sperm cell will combine with an egg cell that has 23 chromosomes. And when they combine during fertilization, then they will create the complete 46 chromosome set. So the sperm itself, its head contains the nucleus, the DNA, the midpiece contains the mitochondria, so it needs a lot of energy for moving the tail, which is a flagellum that helps it move. So here we have the structure of a sperm. The acrosome is the part of the head that'll kind of break through the egg if that occurs. And when that acrosome breaks through an egg, it opens up and releases the DNA from the nucleus into the oocyte. Male sex hormones, we have gonadotropin releasing hormone. It's produced in the hypothalamus and will start the stimulation or the release of LH and FSH. Luteinizing hormone stimulates secretion of testosterone, which has a lot of important jobs during puberty, and follicle stimulating hormone prompts spermatogenesis. Follicle stimulating stimulates the production of follicles, which are gametes, or your sperm cells. So testosterone is produced in your interstitial cells in the testes. It's involved in the development and maintenance of the reproductive organs. Inhibin secreted by cells of the seminiferous tubules will inhibit follicle stimulating hormone when you don't need sperm anymore. So here's male reproductive hormone regulation. Again, GnRH usually starts during puberty to stimulate the release of LH and FSH to start the secretion of testosterone and help with spermatogenesis. So male puberty is the sequence of events when a boy begins to produce male hormones, sperm cells. It usually begins between 12 to 14 and ends around 18. Testosterone is the big one here that's released. And testosterone is what helps to develop secondary sexual characteristics like the skin texture, fat distribution, hair growth, skeletal muscle growth, and also larynx changes. And that has to do with lengthening your vocal cords. So your voice drops, becomes lower. And when that happens, an Adam's apple develops to be a little more prominent in the males versus the females. The Male Sex Act, I'll let you guys read through this on your own. What happens with emission, ejaculation. I don't think you guys will have specific questions on that, but I'll let you guys read through the Male Sex Act on your own. Penile erection, I'll let you guys read through how blood fills all the small venous sinuses. Ejaculation, then you can read through as well. And again, you won't have specifics about this, but I'll let you guys read through those on your own. And then we'll go into female reproductive system. So the male's prime goal is to get a sperm into a female, and the female in response is, if fertilization does occur, to then kind of focus on maintaining that fertilization and pregnancy. So the female reproductive organ will consist of the ovaries, which are the female gonads, the uterine tubes, the uterus, the vagina, all external genitalia, as well as mammary glands, which is the ability to breastfeed the young that would potentially be born. The internal reproductive organs of the female are located within the pelvis, and they're between the urinary bladder and the rectum, as shown here. So we have the ovaries where eggs are produced. They will travel through the uterine tube, and within the uterine tube, this is where fertilization most often occurs. So sperm will actually travel up into the uterine tube where fertilization would occur. Then in the uterus, this is where the fertilized egg would implant and kind of bury itself into the wall as it develops into a zygote, embryo, and eventually a fetus. Here's the cervix, which is opening to the uterus. The cervix is what will dilate to 10 centimeters, which is kind of scary to think about if you're about to give birth. And then the vagina is just the birth canal. You can see external genitalia, labia minora and majora are kind of flaps of skin. Again, just to kind of protect as much as possible the opening to the vagina and the cervix. Everything in the female is kind of more hostile to try to keep things out, again, as a way to protect a developing fetus embryo if it were growing. You can see here how the uterus is between the rectum and the bladder. So this is why females who are pregnant have to pee all the time. As the uterus grows larger, you can see how the uterus is directly over the bladder. So the growing uterus will push directly onto the urinary bladder. So even if there's just a little bit of urine in the urinary bladder, it'll cause that stretch sensation on the bladder, which will make females think that they need to go to the bathroom. From the front, we have female reproductive organs. We see the ovaries. They're not directly connected to the uterine tube, so we'll see kind of these finger-like extensions here that are called fimbriae, and they help to kind of guide the egg from the ovary into the uterine tube. This broad ligament is a piece of connective tissue that helps anchors the uterus to the surrounding kind of pelvic cavity. We have these three kind of layers of the uterus: the endometrium, which gets sloughed off once a month during a woman's period or monthly cycle if no fetus is embedded in the uterus. The myometrium is the muscular layer, and then the perimetrium is the serous layer. So that kind of look at the female reproductive system. Last thing I just wanted to mention here, you can see the cervical canal, the opening of the cervix, and then the vagina. So the ovaries then are the primary female reproductive organ. They produce the oocytes, the eggs, as well as other sex hormones. You have one on either side of the uterus. The ovarian ligaments and suspensory ligaments anchor the ovaries to either the uterus or the pelvic cavity. And the ovarian follicle are the cells in the ovaries that contain the oocytes. So here's a look at the ovary and the ovarian follicles, which will produce oogenesis, or the production of ovaries. And you can see kind of oogenesis occurring here as primordial follicles turning into primary oocytes, secondary follicles, and eventually the primary oocyte itself. The uterine or fallopian tubes is the part of the uterus which extends toward the ovaries, receives the oocytes, and we have kind of fimbriae or fringe or finger-like structures that open around the opening of the uterine tubes that help sweep or direct the oocyte into the uterine tubes. And if you get your tubes tied or ligated, this is sterilization of the female so that the egg can't reach into the uterine tube. The uterus is a pear-sized structure located in the pelvic cavity. It helps to receive, retain, and provide nourishment for a fertilized oocyte where an embryo will reside and develop. The body is the main part, with the cervix as the narrow region and opening that leads into the vagina. It has 3 walls to it. The perimetrium is the outermost layer. The myometrium will be the thick muscular layer, which is composed of smooth muscle. So that's an involuntary muscle. And then the endometrium is the innermost layer that's sloughed off during menstruation. The vagina extends from the uterus to the outside of the body. This will receive the penis during intercourse, as well as serve as the birth canal. It's involved in childbirth, allows menstrual flow. It contains very thick muscular walls and a mucous membrane, and it's very acidic to keep bacteria out, to try to protect anything that could be growing inside. The vulva itself is kind of the entirety of the female external sex organs, where we have the mons pubis, labia majora, minora, clitoris, and the vestibule. The mons pubis will be the fatty layer of skin covering the pubic symphysis. The labia majora and minora are the outer folds of skin, inner folds of skin. The clitoris is the small erectile structure located in the vestibule. The prepuce is where the 2 labia minora unite over the clitoris, and the vestibule is the space in which the vagina and the urethra is open. So here's a look at female external genitalia as shown here. As you can see that. Here's the maturation of the oocyte and the follicles, starting with oogenesis or oogonia, where we have a mitotic division, and then we go through meiosis, where we have kind of the 2 divisions producing 4 egg cells. And usually in oogenesis, only 1 egg cell will be viable, but it will just have 23 chromosomes. Ovulation then is the release of an oocyte from the ovary. It's always due to an increase in luteinizing hormone secreted from your anterior pituitary. So couples who are trying to get pregnant, they can kind of manage or kind of detect this surge in luteinizing hormone, knowing that the luteinizing hormone surge will occur right before ovulation occurs, which is the release of the egg. Corpus luteum then is the mature follicle after ovulation, and this will degenerate if the egg is not fertilized. One difference between females and males is that females are born with all of their oogonia, about 2 million, unlike males that only begin to produce sperm during puberty. At puberty in females, only about 300,000 to 400,000 oogonia are left. And then puberty to menopause, follicle stimulating hormone then will stimulate several follicles to begin developing during each menstrual cycle, but only 1 follicle should be ovulated at a time. Unless 2 eggs are dropped at a time, then you might have the possibility of twins. Oocytes are swept into one of the uterine tubes by the fimbriae. If a sperm is present in the uterine tube during ovulation, the oocyte could be fertilized. If fertilization does occur, then the zygote will implant in the uterine wall. Oocytes only live for about 24 hours. So if no sperm is present at ovulation, no zygote will develop. The oocyte dies. Female puberty then begins between 11 to 13 age and is usually completed by 16. And menarche is what we call the first episode of menstrual bleeding. The vagina, the uterus, the uterine tubes, and external genitalia will enlarge. Fat is deposited to the breast and hips for childbearing purposes and feeding potential offspring. And we kind of start to see elevated levels of estrogen and progesterone that are secreted by the ovaries. The mammary glands then are the organs of milk production in the breasts. They're like modified sweat glands, but they produce milk instead of sweat. The female breasts will begin to enlarge during puberty. They consist of lobes covered by adipose or fat tissue, and the lobes, ducts, and lobules will be altered during lactation or nursing to expel milk. And this is what is seen here. So we have a lot of kind of suspensory ligaments, adipose tissue, and then the specific myoepithelial cells and the gland cells that will produce the milk. This is why kind of breast cancer is interesting because the breasts are so highly kind of vascularized, there's a huge duct system, and that breast cancer can spread or metastasize very easily. So it's just really important to check, yourself for lumps. Females, just always get them checked out. It's never bad to be extra safe to check out lumps because breast tissue, if not caught early, breast cancer can metastasize or spread. Female sex hormones, we begin with gonadotropin releasing hormones during puberty. So kind of the same situation as males. That produces, it stimulates the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. The luteinizing hormone is what will cause ovulation, the release of an egg, and follicle stimulating hormone is produced in the anterior pituitary to promote or prompt follicles in the ovary to begin development. Estrogen is one of the main female sex hormones that causes proliferation of endometrial cells, causes development of mammary glands, especially your duct system. It controls luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And estrogen is what helps to develop and maintain secondary sex characteristics. Progesterone is the enlargement of the endometrial cells and the secretion of fluid from the uterine glands. It causes maintenance of the pregnancy state. So when you are pregnant, you'll get high levels of progesterone. It develops the mammary glands and it controls estrogen, FSH, and LH secretion, as well as helping develop those secondary sex characteristics as well. And then the menstrual cycle is the series of monthly changes that occur in sexually mature, non-pregnant females. Menses is specifically the time when the endometrium is shed from the uterus. I used to watch Big Bang Theory, and Sheldon also always called it the menses, and I just thought that was funny. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. The Big Bang Theory, maybe that was a long time ago now. The average of the menstrual cycle for females is 28 days, could be 30, could be maybe 27, and it results from cyclical changes that occur in the endometrium, which is the inner layer of the uterus. Days 1 to 5 is the menses, which is the shedding of the endometrium, or the bleeding, which occurs if there is not a zygote implanted. Estrogen and progesterone levels will be extremely low because there's no pregnancy. So a follicle will begin to mature eventually into an oocyte. Days 6 to 13 are the proliferative phase where the endometrium rebuilds, estrogen levels begin to increase, progesterone levels are still low, and the follicle continues to mature eventually into an egg. Day 14 is actually the ovulation period where the egg or the oocyte is released due to an increased surge or level of luteinizing hormone. Estrogen levels will be extremely high, progesterone levels will be increasing because they'll want to be ready in case that egg is fertilized and implants, then the progesterone levels will really kind of skyrocket. The cervical mucus will thin. Days 15 to 28 are the secretory cycle or phase between ovulation and the next menses, where the endometrium will prepare for implantation if a fertilization were to occur. Estrogen levels are starting to decrease, progesterone levels are high at this point, and the cervical mucus thickens. So here's the menstrual cycle, the pituitary gland hormones that are secreted, levels of estrogen, progesterone, and the endometrium, the inner wall of the uterus. And let's just focus on day 14 here, because around day 14, we have the luteinizing hormone surge, the release of the egg, ovulation. So we have high estrogen levels. Progesterone levels will increase as the endometrium layer kind of gets ready to possibly receive a fertilized egg. Menopause is the time when the ovaries secrete less hormones and the number of follicles in the ovaries is low. The menstrual cycle and ovulation would become less regular. Because we have kind of changes in hormones, the woman can go through hot flashes, fatigue, irritability, not a pleasant kind of time in a woman's life, but I think they get through it one way or the other. Estrogen replacement therapy can sometimes be used to help decrease these side effects. Then the sexual behavior, again, I will let you guys kind of read through this on your own. It's dependent on hormones, just like males, to help influence that sexual behavior. Psychological factors can also play a role. Here's the female sex act that you guys can read through on your own as well. I don't think you guys will be asked specific questions. Then we'll kind of end the last two slides with different methods of contraception. Many methods are used to prevent pregnancy, either by preventing fertilization, which is contraception, or by preventing implantation of a developing embryo. The methods can include behavioral, barrier, chemical, or surgical. So here we have condoms, kind of a vaginal cup. We have different spermicides. Here's an IUD, which would be implanted in the uterus. We have contraceptive pills, which are basically estrogen pills to kind of keep you from ovulating an egg. Here's a ductus deferens cut and tied, so in a vasectomy. And then here would be a tubal ligation where a uterine tube would be cut and tied. So that takes us through chapter 19, reproductive system, and I will see you guys on Wednesday, tomorrow, for our last class on chapter 20, which will be development and hereditary. So thanks for listening, guys.